Thank you, Kay. That was awesome. Now, I think in the old days, they probably would have dragged us outside and burned us at the stake if we sang that in church. I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen here. I think actually it should be New Thought theme songs because we are a questioning people, aren't we? Everything has to be felt within our hearts and know that it's true. Now, that song comes from the great opera Porgy and Bess, written by Ira and George Gershwin and first performed in 1935. It was quite a remarkable story for them. The Gershwins decided that performance, if it was ever performed on stage, it would always be performed by an all-black cast. This was in 1935. That was revolutionary and radical. But I love this story for a lot of reasons, so we're going to use it for a while to discuss what we're planning to talk about. Porgy and Bess lived in a small town in South Carolina. And Porgy was a disabled man who did not have the use of his legs, but he was loved by his entire community for who he was within. They could see who he was within. Bess, on the other hand, was on the other side of that street. She was an alcoholic. She was a drug dealer. She was running with the wrong crowd. Her boyfriend was the bully of the town, and no one liked her. The women in the town shunned her completely. She was not involved or allowed to be involved in anything. But early in the story, Bess and her semi-boyfriend, who thought he owned her instead of loved her, came into town to cause trouble. And at one point, her boyfriend was named Crown. And he got into an argument with someone over a dice game and killed that person and decided to abandon Bess in town, where he escaped out into the outer islands off South Carolina coast. Well, Bess had nothing and no friends, and nobody wanted her. And she went around and knocked on all the doors, and the women would open the door and slam the door in her face over and over again throughout the early part of this story. She was at her last resort. She was at the very, very bottom of her life. She did not know what to do. She did not know where to go. And she ended up on the ground floor of this apartment complex where Porgy lived, and she knocked on his door, expecting nothing, I'm sure. But when Porgy opened the door, something remarkable happened, because he didn't see the alcoholic. He didn't see the drug addict. He didn't see the woman who was sleeping around with everybody in the city. What he saw was light. Oof, better talk about that. Anyway, so he looked at her, saw who she was on the inside, and without hesitation invited her into his home with no expectations of any kind. It was an act of completely unconditional love, an act that I can learn a lot from personally. So it's an amazing story, and we'll talk about it again in a moment, but from an ego perspective and from the human perspective, it is the age-old question of, are we going to live from our human self? Or are we going to live from our ego self? Are we going to look within and find this treasure within and live from our spiritual self, our true self? So thinking in terms of ego selves, it made me remember about a story. I know we're going to talk about a Bible story because it's me up here. We're going to talk about a story in the early days of the Exodus, probably mythical Exodus. And it's called Korah's Rebellion. But the concept of ego and what it does for us or doesn't do for us has led me to this story. Now, Korah and his close family and a significant number of close friends were all Levites. And under Torah law, if you're a Levite man, it means you have a job in the temple or around the Ark of the Covenant or something, but you have a job handed to you because you belong to the Levite tribe. That's how it worked. Moses and Aaron were high priests. They were also both Levites, but they were high priests. They got to go into the inner sanctum. They literally, in those days, got to speak to God for everyone else. And Korah and his family had gotten tired of that. What about me? What's in it for me? How come I don't have more? Can I have a better job? I want your job, he was saying. And so he went to Moses with his closest family members and said, listen, we're not really happy about this. You guys get all the press, all the prestige, all the press, all the clippings, and we get nothing. Nobody even knows we're here. I'm holding up a pole by the Ark of the Covenant. That's it. I want more. So Moses did something kind of remarkable. He didn't get upset with them. He didn't yell at him. He didn't call him a bunch of names. He said, I'll tell you what we'll do. You guys come with your censers, which is the incense burning things that you see in Catholic and Episcopal churches a lot. And you come with those, and we'll gather around together, and we will pray, and we'll ask God what we should do. Because Moses was saying, this is really above my pay grade here. So we're gonna step up, go to a higher level of authority, and see what happens. So they did that. The next day they gathered, and it was Korah and his closest male family members. And they began to pray and light their incense. And just as they did, the story says that God spoke to Moses. And he said, Moses, I need you to back away. You and Aaron need to back away from this group because I'm fixing to take these guys out. Now, God was a Texan because he talks like that. I know, my wife will never forgive me. So God speaks to Moses and Moses and Aaron do back away, knowing that something is really serious going to happen. And in that moment, a gigantic sinkhole opens up underneath Korah and his family, and they all fall down into the sinkhole. And it says that they fell down alive, not just like they died and fell in, but they fell into the hole alive, like a really big punishment. And their houses and everything collapse in on top of them. So if you read this story literally, what you would find is a God who picks winners and losers. And that same story is found throughout the Old Testament over and over and over again. And unfortunately, a lot of people still believe in a God that picks winners and losers. I do not. That's not where I am. But it would say that God had chosen Moses once again to be the leader of the Hebrews. And anybody who disagrees with him or God, because Moses and God are the same, will be punished severely. And that was the story. But I believe the Bible is the stories that tell a story. So if we look at this metaphorically or metaphysically, what we're really seeing, in a way, is the Porgy and Bess story. Egos got in the way. I'm unhappy about something. I don't have any gratitude for what I have. I'm greedy. I want more. What I have is not enough. I want more. And that kind of thinking is what the authors of the Bible were trying to speak against, because it was even against the Ten Commandments. So that's the purpose of that story, and I think it's very, very powerful. But the other side of the story is, should we be reading the Bible literally? And what do the earliest church fathers think about that? What really happened? It's surprising to me when you think about Jesus' tenure on the earth, he was actually pushing back against the Torah all the time. He was saying, your God doesn't live on your mountain. I'm sorry, that's not God. And your God, the Samaritan's God, doesn't live on your mountain either. So God is everywhere, and everywhere present is what he was saying. That was heretical, big time heretical. And those kinds of comments are what got him executed eventually in his life. And yet, even though you see that in the Bible and you know that Jesus was pushing against that, most of Christianity now follows the belief that the Bible should be read literally. But one of my favorite characters in early Christianity is a guy named Origen of Alexandria. And you probably did not get this read to you in Sunday school, I'm pretty sure. He was probably the most influential Christian theologian, and he was born in 185 AD, about 150 years after the death of Jesus, but at the same time as actually the book of John was being completed and modified and completed and modified. So he was in amongst the spiritual and religious, the spiritual and religious time of the day, of that time. He was also the head of the school of Alexandria, where he was in charge of teaching anyone who wanted to become part of the church. He was actually teaching them lessons so that they could become baptized by what was going to become the Catholic Church. So what did he say? What was his opinion about how to read the Bible and what it meant? He said, "Now the reason why some people hold false opinions and make impious or ignorant assertions about God appears to be nothing else but this, that Scripture is not understood in its spiritual sense, but it is interpreted to the bare letter, to the literal sense." He was saying even then that it was not possible to read the Bible literally. You must read it at the spiritual sense of the words. He went on to say, "They, the gospel writers, made full use of the things said and done by Jesus. But sometimes, to serve their mystical aim, they change things from how they historically occurred, speaking of a thing that happened at a certain place as if it happened at another time, or introduced into what was spoken in a certain way and made some changes of their own." This was the most influential theologian in the year 200 AD. He went on to say, "Where possible, they proposed to speak the truth both literally and spiritually, but where this was not possible, it was their intention to prefer the spiritual meaning to the literal." Finally, he said, "The spiritual truth was often preserved in the written form, as one might say, by means of a lie." That's shocking. This was the understanding of the leaders of what was growing to be Christianity, but at this time it wasn't even Christianity. This was around 200. So we're being encouraged to open up our hearts and our eyes and our minds when we do read Scripture and look underneath the words, just like we might want to look underneath the words of the Porgy and Bess story as well. So a good sermon's not very good unless we talk about sin for a while. And the more I study this, the more I find out that the doctrine of original sin was kind of a new invention. It was not even known or understood at the time of Origen of Alexandria, nor was it really understood, I think, at the time of Jesus as well. I do not believe that's what he was teaching. But it turns out that a man named Augustine of Hippo, who turned into being St. Augustine, a really big, important person in the Catholic Church eventually, Christian Church, he's the one who developed the concept or the doctrine of the origin of sin, and of original sin, excuse me. And he did that because he went back and ignored the fact that one must read the Bible in some metaphysical way. He decided that he must begin to read the Bible literally, and he goes all the way back to Adam and Eve and says, well, the Adam and Eve story was real. Men fell from grace, pushed by women, of course. Men fell from grace, and that was the original sin. And St. Augustine believed that it was transmitted biologically from human to human to human to human. There was no escaping original sin. And that was surprising to me. And then, of course, if you believe in the original sin, doctrine of original sin, then there has to be a way to escape that. And that is where the concept of needing a Savior, God, in your place to be able to move away from and get away from this original sin, because the goal was to reconnect with God eventually. But once again, I want to go back to my friend Origen of Alexandria. What did they really believe about that? And a lot of his writings exist. So this is a quote. Well, this is a quote from people who wrote about him. Origen of Alexandria firmly believed that the knowledge of the good with a capital G, he was talking about God, that the good is itself enough to remove all taint of sin and ignorance from souls. A freedom to embrace evil, which he called the absence of good, not a separate power, but the absence of good, would have made no sense to Origen, who identified evil with enslavement and goodness with freedom. He said, the soul who has seen the good, when we see the good, when we experience that in our lives, he argued, would not fall into ignorance again. For the good is inspiring and worthy of eternal contemplation. I like this guy a lot. The fact that he understands God as good and purely good. He developed a concept in the early church, which I believe that Jesus knew as well. He taught the concept of the preexistence of the soul, that our soul, our essence, our higher power was made before the material world was ever created. He also taught that these souls were created by God in purity, and how could they be made any other way? If you have an infinite God and a purely good God, how would you expect that purely good God to ever create the essence of all of us in anything but pure form? So I think Origen knew what he was talking about. He also talked about the concept of spiritual ascent. And he said that growth is not about escaping sin, but about awakening to divine truth. When Bess had the door opened to her there at the beginning of Porgy and Bess, she was awakening to divine truth. She was being accepted she was being accepted unconditionally by Porgy. She was in that moment awakening to divine truth. And I know that probably everybody in this room has had an experience like that, of awakening to this infinite love that is around us all the time. A little bit later, in 1300, a really amazing human being named Meister Eckhart spoke about what was a radical idea at that time, because now we're immersed in the Catholic Church, and that's all there was the Catholic Church. And his radical idea said that that oneness of God, oneness with God, is our natural state. And I love that too. God is good, perfect, and pure as we are, and it's our natural state. So there's more to learn than just shows up on the surface. Origen also believed that our souls will eventually reemerge and reconnect with this infinite source. It was an unusual concept because he was probably talking in a way about the first concept of reincarnation. Did not believe in hell, did not believe in damnation or any of that stuff. He believed that we were born, that we had pure souls, and they were always perfect within us. But we have human bodies and human egos that get in our way. So I want to turn back to the Porgy and Bess story because I think it exemplifies a little bit about what we're talking about. At the very end of the story, by this time, love had grown between Porgy and Bess. She began to be fully accepted by the community as she found out who she really was. She found out that there was a spirit, a God essence of her that was pure, and that she was pure. And they ended up getting married. They ended up having a small baby. And then, unfortunately, as things happen in life, her ex-boyfriend shows up at the middle of the night, tries to sneak into their window while they're sleeping, and there's a fight between Crown and Porgy. And Porgy ends up killing Crown. Sometimes I think we have to get rid of those ego parts of ourselves that are so stuck on us and so fully immersed into our hearts. And so metaphorically, we have to kill things off so that we can find out who we really are. But in the story, the next day they find his body, the police come, they suspect Porgy, and they take him off for questioning. And that night, the drug dealer who has lusted after Bess his whole life showed up at her door, knocked on the door, and entered and tried to convince her that her life was over. Porgy wasn't coming back. Life as she's known it is gone. You're doomed. The best thing you can do is come with me to New York City and I will buy you dresses. I'll get you stuff. Life will be great. And then as he left, unfortunately, he put some cocaine on the table in front of her. And she had not been a drug user for a long, long, long time. And she gave in to that and spiraled downward very, very quickly and ended up giving her baby to one of the townsfolk and left with him to New York City. Tragic. I mean, I can't even imagine. Just a few days later, Porgy is released from jail. They didn't have evidence about him, so they couldn't charge him. And he comes back so excited because he was waiting to see Bess and couldn't find her. But the villagers around him knew what was going on, so they swarmed down. They were so glad to see him, but they didn't want to tell him what had happened. And eventually somebody said, Porgy, Bess is gone. And he understood that to mean Bess has died. And he was inconsolable, completely inconsolable. But eventually they saw that pain, the pain that caused him. And so he said, no, Porgy, she's not dead. She left. She left with a drug dealer guy and went to New York City. And as soon as they told him that, I mean, think about what our reaction might be. We would be incensed. We would be betrayed. We'd be enraged. We'd be all these human emotions. But what Porgy did was merely see the light in the love of his life. There was no hesitancy in him whatsoever. He saw the spirit that he knew was there within her, never wavered, never moved, and immediately packed up in his small little cart pulled by a goat and ran off 1,000 miles to go see Bess in New York City. Now that's commitment. But it also describes, I think, the kind of love that Origen of Alexandria was talking about. God the good, God the perfect, God the love. I think it's something that I need to aspire more to open up my own heart and be the better person that I can be. Thank you. Well, let's take these thoughts into meditation because they're really a wonderful experience, actually, that we're seeing Porgy demonstrate to us about what love really is. Or what believing in a God of good, not a God of punishment. So let's relax into this for the moment and feel what it might feel like to actually be that non-judgmental. What if we could fill our lives with love continuously and put aside the anger and the jealousies and all of the human emotions that just get in the way of our happiness? This is what these stories tell me. We can find our way through any situation by realizing that there is a power and a presence that is surrounding us at all time, leading us in a better way, giving us the power to walk through the difficult times of our lives, knowing that there is something there behind us, guiding our way, lighting our way. Living in a world of pure, unconditional love to the extent that we possibly can. Knowing that that's what we're called to do, led to do, and loved to do. Perhaps there's someone in our lives right now that needs that kind of unconditional love coming from us. Could certainly pick Bob and Melinda for their trials, but everyone in this room I know has someone who would accept your unconditional prayer and love right now. The essence of us is God. The essence of us is truth. The essence of us is love, compassion, understanding, and a complete unconditional love to all beings around us. This I know is our truth. Let's hold that person in your mind right now as we go into a silence for just a few minutes. Surround them in your love. Feel their love surrounding you. Now feel their love returning to you 10 times over. Because that is how it is. That is how it works. And know that as we open up our hearts more and more and more and live in this world through unconditional love, we won't have to ask for rewards because they will be there for us. This loving spirit is within us now and is always within us, even if we've forgotten where we hid it. Now, as you can, begin to come back to the room, knowing that you're surrounded by love. Thank you.